Wasn't that an introduction? You would have seen on the list of BlackEarth, and Paul just mentioned that we've recently changed our name. Last Friday, shareholders voted overwhelmingly to change the name from BlackEarth Minerals to Evion. It's really a move from the company. We recently finished the definitive feasibility study of our primary asset in Madagascar, the Mineral Graphite Project. But we're also developing downstream processing plants and opportunities in other countries. So we thought we really want to move away from that typical mining sort of picture and move on to something more progressive. And thus we came up with the name Evion Group. Corporate structure, we generally start with these discussions. I'll keep it short on this. Really, there's a number of key issues here. The first one is the number of shares on issue. 279. The share structure hasn't blown out to billions of shares, and yet we've managed to complete exploration, 2 feasibility studies, and shortly another scoping study. So we've created some real value whilst keeping control of the numbers of shares on issue. The other key point is the enterprise value. And I'm highlighting $14 million US because our industry really works in that US dollar denominated industry. And I want you to remember that number, $14 million, because this is an investment conference, and consequently all the references to the projects that we're developing will be in US dollars, so it puts it in context. This is the board and management. There's a lot of grey hair there, a lot of experience, knowledge and skill base there. The skills and etc. cover the breadth of developing projects in Africa, graphite sales, commercial, technical ability, project development experience, etc. And so we've got a really committed team towards developing the assets that we have. And consequently, it's no surprise that we actually put our first drill hole down in Madagascar, and 4.5 years later, we finished the feasibility study. And that's the focus of the team that we have. We're not explorers, we're actually project developers. The presentation is really in 2 parts. The first one is all about getting excited about the graphite market. The second one will be the assets that we have and how they fit in really nicely within that growing graphite opportunity that exists out there. A lot of people would have looked back about 2-3 years ago and said, if only I invested in lithium at that stage. And since then, even 12 months ago, we saw nickel go for a ride up to about $80,000 a tonne. And we saw cobalt do the same thing in 2016, and we all sit there kicking ourselves, if only I knew. Well, there are certain markers, ladies and gentlemen, that are out there that you could have seen, and if you put them together, you'll realise that graphite is on the cusp of something great. And we're seeing a lot more literature coming out these days on graphite and the graphite story. These are just some comments by people who follow the graphite market very closely, and you only have to look at one of the key points being that natural graphite will go into deficit next year, which is one of those markers that we saw on the lithium, nickel side, etc. The other key ones were that China is now a material importer of natural graphite. Historically, it produced so much it was a net exporter, but in 21 it started to import natural graphite. This calendar year it imported a lot, and that is only destined to grow even more. And the other thing that happens in 23 is that for the first time, the biggest use of natural graphite will be into electric vehicles. And all those markers signal well for the graphite market in 2023. As Paul alluded to, they're lithium-ion batteries, but if you have a look at the picture attached, you'll see that graphite in your average electric vehicle constitutes nearly 30% in total of the commodities that go into an electric vehicle battery. Typically, people get excited about lithium. We're talking about 3.2%, nickel around 16%, copper at about 11%. So it's almost the combined total of those metals in graphite, and it's going into deficit next year. So from my point of view, that bodes well for the graphite price. Graphite price moves up, as we've seen in the other commodities. The equity, the shares in those particular commodities do very well. There's probably pictures as good as I've seen in the last few years. Benchmark Minerals, who you may or may not be aware of, is is a global group who focuses on critical commodities. And to put it in context, we're talking about an increase in global production or demand from 1.1 million tonnes at the moment to about 7.2 million tonnes by 2035. That's just 13 years away. That equates to 97 new graphite mines. Now, one of the things that we do as graphite developers is that we monitor each other's good, bad and ugly attributes, and so we learn from them constantly. So we've got a list of about 25 globally that we follow. And then there's some very early stage ones, so you could probably put another 10 or 15 there. And there's potential for current producers to expand. That still leaves, say, 50 in round numbers of where's this graphite coming from. So it's not enough to say, oh, this will accelerate those people in graphite. Those people don't exist. So again, graphite price could double in price, which is an exceptional outcome for graphite producers and their shareholders, but it won't make a material difference to the price of an electric vehicle. So that opportunity in its own right is there as well. And this basically summarises it. So if you look at the blue graph, the blue line, it basically says the deficit starts to happen in 2023. It starts to be a material deficit, but by 27 it falls off the cliff. And these guys are experts, and they can't identify where that additional graphite is coming from. And that's what gets us excited. That's what gets us out of bed at Evian. To the projects itself, our main project, as I said, is located in Madagascar, in the southern part of Madagascar. In the last few weeks, we published the results of our feasibility study. The NPV pre-tax $263 million US, post-tax $205 million. Remember, our enterprise value was $14 million. We also have another project that we're currently building in India. Okay, so it's beyond feasibility study, it's in full development. And it adds another $40 million to the NPV post-tax. So now we're up to $243 million. We've got a 21-year mine life already under the DFS for our Mineral Graphite project, 18 of which are in reserve. If you actually take our total resource, that mine life probably goes out to about 40, 45 years. We have an exploration target because we're living in a graphite district, not just in a small area, and we have them all under lease. But if you take our exploration target of 260 to 380 million tonnes, that gives us potentially 200 years. The point is that the life and the opportunity that exists for us at Mineral is huge. We can build it, we can expand it, we can expand it again and expand it again. It is going to be there. It's going to be a very long life mine. Why did we go to Madagascar? We made a deliberate point of going to Madagascar when we first started the company and listed it back in 2018. We went there because Madagascar's been producing graphite and exporting it for over 100 years. It's known by end users for its high quality product. So for us to sell our product overseas and say we're from Madagascar is a non-issue. 90% of graphite is produced from countries, based on this graph, riskier than Madagascar. So we're in the good part. It's also the largest producer or largest supplier of graphite into China and one of the largest into India and the US. And it's got a great fiscal regime as well, and there's no free carried interest. From a location point of view, that's a map of Madagascar, and to put it in context, the area of Madagascar is about the size of France. We're in the southern part of that, and you'll see from the Google Earth image that there's not a lot of vegetation where we are. It's basically undulating savanna ground and very, very sparsely populated. We have that blue line denotes the road that goes through, and we have a choice of two ports, one at Toliara and one at Fort Dauphin, which is owned by Rio in the southeast there. The World Bank has come to our assistance, not really our assistance, but the country's assistance, and they're going to plug in over $300 million US, bitumenising the bulk of that road. And that'll happen progressively over the next 2 to 3 years. And when that happens, that will have a marked improvement in terms of our cost, which is already fairly attractive. Our pathway to production in regards to the Mineral project, basically we're looking to get into construction by Q3 next year. Prior to that, we've got a bit of homework to do. We've got to complete our environmental social impact assessment. We've got to finalise legally binding offtakes, finishing the licensing, permitting and project financing, etc. Thereafter, construction is estimated to take 14 months, and that puts us into a commissioning mode Q4 24, just to coincide nicely within that deficit that I showed you earlier. ESG is important to us, and we've taken it seriously since day one. We see it as an integral part of our risk management process. You can read that at your leisure, but unfortunately southern Madagascar is one of the poorest parts of Madagascar, and Madagascar is one of the poorest countries in the world. So we continue to support the local population by way of food supplies, providing them several tonnes of food at a time to the various villages. We've recently finished building a school there. We've furnished another school. We work with Australian Doctors for Africa, and we've helped build a medical clinic nearby. And we see that as part of our responsibility moving forward in regards to developing that project. Our Indian joint venture project is, as I said, underway. We're building a project in Pune, just inland from Mumbai, and we put out the financials in terms of the feasibility in Q3 this year. The NPV for the whole project, 100% project, is $78 million US. It's a small startup exercise. CapEx is only $3 million US. All those figures, obviously 50%, are attributable to us, but it puts us into the graphite game, and we want to be recognised ultimately as a player, as a material player in the vertically integrated graphite space. The location is also a special economic zone, and we already have binding offtake for that material from an Austrian company called Graphite Bergbau. That's just the engineering layout that we completed a while ago in terms of what the project looks like. And as I said, our plan is to be in full production in 2023, which is very soon. Finally, our scoping study. We're doing a scoping study on a battery anode material plant for Europe. At the moment, battery anode material, if you like, is an intermediate product. So once the concentrate is produced from a mine, prior to actually becoming an anode, it's got to go through a number of processes, and that's typically what we refer to as battery anode material. We've tested our material. We had our material tested by a German laboratory, Dorfner Anzaplan. It took about 10 months, but it provided the board and management sufficient comfort to know that our material was as good as any as you can get around the world in terms of suitability for high-end lithium-ion batteries. So this will basically come out in the next few weeks, this study. It hasn't been incorporated into our valuation. So again, it provides that upside that exists in our opportunity. Why are we in it? Because you can see from the dark blue that is Chinese output for what we call SPG, spherical purified graphite, or battery anode material, same thing. The yellow denotes new SPG or battery anode material plants being built around the world, and you can see the black is basically what's required from battery producers as far as producing that material. So we see this as a massive opportunity. It also takes product that typically you'd get in today's market about $750 a tonne for, and we'll realise a sale price of about $3,500. So the uplift is certainly very attractive and could be extremely beneficial for shareholders. And this is the value proposition, ladies and gentlemen. Basically, as I pointed out, the Mineri DFS NPV is around that $260 million mark, add another $50 million in regards to the Indian joint venture, and you end up with a consolidated NPV of about just over $300 million. Again, I draw your attention to what I said earlier, where we have an enterprise value of $14 million, and that's where the value gap exists, and that's where the opportunity exists for investors today. And finally, the thing that's going to bring that along are the short-term actions or the news flow. So over the next 6 to 8 months, we're looking to put out the scoping study results for the battery anode material plant, announce the offtake arrangements, the legally binding offtake arrangements for the Mineri project in Madagascar. We'll complete the environmental social impact assessment exercise that we need to do as part of final licensing and permits, and that will be done to Equator Principles. The project financing will be completed and will commence production at our joint venture expandable graphite plant. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what gets us excited each day and gets us out of bed. I look forward to being here next year and giving you a great update. Thanks very much.